Hey guys, Grounded Critic here. I know it's been a little while since I've posted a video, but I am back, and this one is hopefully going to be worth the wait. It took quite a while on this one, but I'm excited for you guys to see it. So recently, I was re-watching James Gunn's DCU announcement video, and it got me thinking. James Gunn made an announcement video about a year ago talking about his upcoming plans for the DCU and what steps he plans to take going forward. Now, I want to say up front, I think a lot of the things that he announced give me hope for the future. I think there's a lot of things to look forward to, and I think he's taking things in a correct direction in some ways, but in other ways, there are also some red flags that I'm watching out for. James Gunn announced a number of projects, and some of them sound potentially really good, and a couple of them made me question what direction he's deciding to take this. I hope things turn out well, and in fact, they very well could be amazing. In fact, I came up with my own 10-year plan for the DC universe, and I'm hoping that I can look back at this video 10 years from now and say, I was wrong. James Gunn's DC universe turned out 100 times better than what I came up with. I think that should be the outcome. Fans who are not being paid large amounts of money should not be able to come up with better stuff than what these people who are paid to do this, who are put in these places to do, should come up with. I mean, these guys are paid writers. These guys know the business. They know writing. They should theoretically be able to come up with stuff far better than what we did. So I'm hoping, and I'm expecting that when I look back at this video in years from now, after a number of his projects have come out, that I'll say, wow, oh, thankfully they didn't use my ideas and they came up with their own ideas, and their ideas were far better than what I came up with. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that it'll come out and it'll be another train wreck, or, you know, somewhere in between. But anyway, so I started looking back at, before I actually started putting my universe in place, I went back and I looked at the DCEU, which is the Snyderverse, and I looked at what worked and what didn't, and I started thinking about the Snyderverse as a whole. Would you consider that a success or a failure or something in between? I would say at its best, it was inconsistent. At its worst, it was a failure. And I know what you're thinking. A failure? That's a little rough, Grounded Critic. Maybe not a failure, but something else. No, it was a failure. And let me explain why. The DCEU had everything going for it before it started. It had a series of Batman films by Nolan that everyone loved. The DC universe had far more general audience knowledge and appeal than the MCU ever had before they came out. Just looking at the cartoon shows, looking at the toys, there was MCU had Spider-Man and X-Men, and that was about it. All the rest of their characters were B-list, and basically the general audience knew almost nothing about them. The DC universe, most kids knew Batman, they knew Superman, they'd at least heard of the Flash and Wonder Woman. Aquaman had some knowledge as well, but the point is they were much more mainstream. These were the mainstream characters. People knew about them, or at least had some idea of who they were in the zeitgeist, right? Like we had the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. We had the Wonder Woman TV show where she spins around. Batman, since Adam West, has been like a household name. There's no reason why these should not have been primed and ready to go. We had Smallville, we had the Arrowverse. There was so much potential set in place. These were characters that the pump was primed. There was no reason why they couldn't have taken this and run with it. And now we're able to look at the MCU and the DCEU and compare them one to one and show how much that dynamic has changed in the last 10 years. There's no reason why more people should know who Star-Lord is than Hal Jordan. That should never have happened. Why was the Avengers movie a worldwide phenomenon while Justice League was a wet fart? Essentially, what pitfalls should James Gunn be looking out for as he designs his universe? Well, let me give you some ideas here. Let me tell you, these are the thoughts that I had when I came up with mine, and I'm hoping that he at least had some of these same thoughts when he comes up with his. The real issue is when you are trying to make a connected universe, when you are trying to build a version of a character that you want to live for 10 plus years, your goal should be to make a version of the character that is core to that character. Zack Snyder's version of Batman is a comic book Batman, but it's the Dark Knight Returns version of Batman. That is fine if you were doing a solo film. It's not connected to other things. If you want to base it off of one incarnation of Batman, if you're designing a cinematic universe, you want something that has broader appeal, that is more in line with who the character is over his entire lifespan, not one off-cut version. And he did roughly the same thing with Superman. There are versions of Superman that are a little more angsty and dour and distant, but that's not generally the middle of the road Superman. That doesn't encompass most of who that character is. Like, you can't do the Adam West shark repellent Batman and Dark Knight Returns gun using Batman. Like, those two things don't mix, but you can find pieces of the character that work across a broader version. You want them to be the iconic versions themselves. There was this interview with, I believe it was Bruce Timm. I can't seem to find it. If any of you guys in the comments know what interview I'm talking about, but he's talking about the Justice League cartoon show when it first came out. And they were talking to him, and he said there was so much pressure to get these characters right because these versions were going to be an entire generation of children's idea of what these characters are. So he wanted to make sure they embodied the true potential of each of those characters. And that is the mindset that you should have when you're designing a universe from scratch. There's a reason Superman's been around for 80 plus years. There's a reason these characters have endured, and it's because they have elements that everyone can pull from. And if you're only pulling from a subsection of the character's history, and that's all you're doing is, oh, I just want this dark, gritty version, you're missing out on the entirety of who that character can be. And I think that is a huge downfall that Snyder had. I tried to avoid that to the best of my abilities when I was thinking about who these characters are. I wanted them to be more well-rounded. I didn't want to go with one specific version. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't pick storylines from specific versions, right? There might be storylines and elements that were specific to a certain time period of that character, but the character as a whole and who they are as a person encompasses a much broader appeal of the character. I think that was a big issue. DC had no reason not to be the #1 success, except Marvel got there first and DC wanted to catch up, and they built their universe on a rocky foundation, and it eventually fell apart, which is why we're now getting a relaunch. Justice League was never going to be Avengers. Here's why. First and foremost, Avengers got there first. People were excited. They'd never seen anything like it. So Justice League was always going to be following in their footsteps. Secondly, they rushed it. They wanted to get to that as fast as they could, and they did not set these characters up correctly. Let me put it this way. They thought that the DC Extended Universe, what it appears their working theory was, is that Avengers was popular because it was all these heroes together. And it didn't matter whether it was set up or not. It was just the fact that you had all of them on screen together was all you needed to make it work. That is wrong. The reason the Avengers felt so special when it came out, and everyone who saw it when it first came out had this feeling, it was because it was multiple franchises coming together at the same time. It wasn't just that the characters were there. It was that these characters were pre-established. It was like, okay, here's an example of how to think about it, right? Justice League is essentially like Mission Impossible 3, where Ethan Hunt has a team, right? It's like, oh, this team came together, and oh, there's the guy from the other movie. It's like, oh yes, it's him and his team, and it's fun. And it works. It can work on its own. Avengers would be like if Ethan Hunt, Jason Bourne, and James Bond showed up in a movie together. That was Avengers. That's why you set these characters up and you give them full movies, full franchises, and then you bring them together. If you're constantly mixing everything together and just like trying to get there, you haven't established them on their own. So it doesn't feel special when they actually show up. To that point, I think that's an issue that the MCU has right now, where everything is so interconnected and everyone can pull from everything else that nothing feels special anymore. You need to push these people out, have them do their own thing, and then when they come together, it's exciting and special. And that's one of the red flags with James Gunn's DCU announcement is that he's got Superman in a movie with 5 other heroes in his first movie. Not only does that take away from Superman standing on his own, but when we actually get to Justice League, it's not exciting to see Superman team up with other heroes because they've already shown up in his movie. Finally, I'll say this too. The other reason why Avengers was better than Justice League is that its villain was also set up. Loki was already the villain in Thor, in the first Thor movie. So we didn't even have to set up the villain. He could just arrive and we could spend so much more time with the characters. Meanwhile, Justice League, on the other hand, had killed off Superman. So then we had to figure out how to resurrect him. We had to introduce the villain. We had to introduce the Mother Box. We had to introduce an entire backstory for Darkseid and Apocalypse while bringing the team together to be cohesive. And then they have to fight Superman and do, like, it was never going to work. On top of the fact that we had, we wanted to pay off the emotional core of Superman coming back. So we had to bring in Martha and Lois. And it was just taking away time while the Justice League should have been building as a cohesive unit together. We're then forced to take a bunch of time away from the movie to describe Superman coming back with characters from his franchise. It was never going to work as proposed. It was not the right way to do it. So even if you take out all the weird versions and the fact that Whedon came in and rewrote, made it funny and humorous, if you just watch Zack Snyder's version of Justice League, it is still a flawed movie. First off, it's 4 hours long. There is no reason it needs to be 4 hours long. Was it better than what Joss Whedon did? Absolutely. It was 100% better. It was a cohesive vision, but it was still not the right vision. As a whole, this didn't work. It was a failure. We need to start over again. And they're doing it. James Gunn is doing it. I think there's potential here to do good. Let's talk about James Gunn's DC universe before I move into mine. So James Gunn's DCU, first off, he said that cartoon shows, TV shows, live action TV shows, movies, video games, all of them are going to be one vision. When you first hear that, it sounds great. Oh, so if Green Lantern shows up in a TV show or a cartoon show or a video game, it's the same version of Green Lantern. That's awesome. No, when you stop and think about it for a longer period of time, that is a terrible, terrible idea. Let me explain why. Flash, the character of Barry Allen the Flash, is far bigger than Ezra Miller. Ezra Miller is an actor. If every version of the Flash that you ever see in anything has to be Ezra Miller's version of the Flash, you have now lessened who that character is. Superman is bigger than Christopher Reeve. Superman is this character who has existed for 80 plus years. He's hopefully going to be around for at least 80 more. These characters are bigger than one version of themselves. And if you're forcing every person only gets this one specific version of your character for the next 10 plus years, you are lessening who that character is. And what if you get an Ezra Miller Flash? What if you get a version of the character that you just hate? Now you're forced to be stuck with a worse version of a character you love, and that's the only way you're going to get to see them for the next 10 plus years. That sucks. That should not happen. In my version, there will be TV shows, there will be movies, but I want people to still make Elseworlds content. I want other versions of the characters to exist around the same time. I want kids to grow up with a cartoon show of these characters that are not having to be the exact same version that will show up in my movies, because these characters are bigger than just those versions. Okay, so with a look back at what came before and some of the way things have already been structured, now let's get into my DC universe. All right. When I first came up with this, I set up a set of rules because I looked at things that were wrong or that I felt were issues, pitfalls with what came before. And I've seen some of the things that MCU falling off. And I looked and I said, here are some of the reasons that I've diagnosed that I see as problems. And so I'm going to put out, I made like a list of rules. Now, here are the rules. And it's kind of explained my thought process into what I did with my universe. So the first things first, we're doing 3 movies a year max. And it ended up being actually 3 every year for my 10-year plan. So it's 30 movies total. We'll get into it. but 3 movies a year. And the reason for that is less movies and it takes too long to build a universe and you end up having people age out of roles and it becomes a problem. So, but if you do more than that, it becomes quantity over quality and people get tired and they don't want to watch all your films. 3 is like the perfect number. You get one early on, like the February, March, Valentine's Day timeframe. You do one in the summer as your big budget summer one, and then you do one either around Christmas or Halloween or something later in the year. And it gives people plenty of time to watch all of your films, to catch up if they want to. You're not flooding the market. And people don't want to have to watch 5 movies a year. It's like, oh, I don't care about this one because this one's coming out in 2 weeks. Like, it's too much. And we saw that with the MCU when they did, what was it, 4 or 5 movies a year? And it was like every other month there was another movie coming out. And I was like, I can't, this is too much. It was overload. I just stopped caring. So you don't want to do that. And I think 3 is about the max that you would ever want to do. Now, as for TV shows, that's the other problem. If you have 3 movies a year, you can't do a bunch of TV shows as well because it becomes too much. So I came up with 3 movies and 2 shows, and the 2 shows are per phase. So I split up my first 10 years into 3 phases, and each phase will have 2 shows. Now, one of those shows each phase is designed to be shorter, could be like 6-12 episodes. It's kind of designed as, kind of like those HBO Max, like limited series. It's structured, it knows what it wants to be, and it gets in and it gets out and it's done. And that doesn't, usually it's because it plays into the rest of the universe in a different way. Whereas the other show that I designed will be allowed, it has more breathing room. So the other show, each phase will get to run as long as it pretty much wants. Up to usually, I think it's about 5 years before it eventually needs to end because we need time to do other stuff. But that one is basically given, it can run on its own based on the audience, and it has a more open-ended plot line, and it allows the people working on the show to kind of just go as long as the show is required to go for the story that it wants to tell and with how much people like it and want to watch it. So that's kind of how I designed the shows and the movies. 3 movies a year, 2 shows per phase. That's it. Now let's get into some of the ideas for like things to avoid in the movies or things to focus on. One of those things is I want to save individual lives versus saving faceless mobs. So what that means in practice is you watch things like Batman Begins, Spider-Man. The reason why these characters work so well and why you connect with them emotionally is because they're saving people, right? That scene where Spider-Man takes his mask off to give it to the kid inside the car has more emotional weight than Endgame, where they're saving a timeline's worth of people, because we can't, as human beings, we can't connect emotionally to a planet. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to go, oh, the whole planet is gone. Like, I don't care. I care about the individual people that you show me in the story. And so I want to focus on less saving of the idea of people and more saving people. So, and that also carries over not just with saving people, but who you fight, the villains. The faceless mobs, the CGI armies, we're going to try to avoid those as much as possible because, again, it's not exciting to watch CGI superheroes fighting CGI robots that they can just smash around. As much as possible, try to focus on one person fighting someone else, right? You give the characters names, you give them faces, and that way their punches have weight and scale and mean something. So we're going to try to avoid that. Sky beams. We're not doing sky beams. We're avoiding sky beams. Okay. No multiverses. I think that has been played out quite a bit, especially in the MCU side. This whole multiversal saga is just a cluster F, and I'm tired of it. So we're not doing it. So I think what it does when you introduce multiple timelines with multiple universes is it lowers the stakes. It means that if someone dies, we can just go pull them from another universe. I mean, look at the Flash, where we had all the wells from all the different universes that we're not doing that. We're not lowering the stakes by saying, well, we'll just get them from another universe. We're going to fix it there. No. So when we're setting up this universe, I want to care about this universe. I don't want to care about the multiverse. So we're focusing just here in this timeline. We're not doing a bunch of multiverses. It's not happening. At least not in my 10-year plan. Now, if it goes beyond the 10 years, maybe you start introducing multiverses, but I want to care about this universe before I do that. Villains as a whole, in both the MCU and the DCU, there is maybe on one hand, you can count the villains that are actually interesting. So I wanted to take a lot of time to make sure that the villains that we introduce have weight and have multiple dimensions and aren't just throwaway characters that are just there to advance the plot. And that doesn't mean that there aren't always going to be one or two of those characters that end up sucking. My goal is to make sure as much as possible that if you introduce a villain, that we give them time to set them up, and that they're interesting and they're three-dimensional and they don't always just die at the end of the movie. Like a lot of these villains will end up coming back in other projects later on. So yes, so my goal is the villains have been a negative across the board in both of these franchises. We're not doing the big gray alien villains every movie, right? We're not doing the faceless mobs. We're doing fleshed out, interesting, emotionally interesting villains. Another thing, love. What happened to romance in any of these movies? And I know what you're thinking, who cares about romance? These are designed for like superheroes punching each other. Yes, but throughout the known realm of history, right? Throughout all of written language, storytelling, almost always the stories that have endured throughout history, the best movies of all time have an element of love and relationship in them. So the fact that so many, I think that's why we've disconnected from a lot of these superhero movies, is that they don't have any character outside of the costume. They don't have anyone that they're in a relationship with. They're not, and that doesn't always have to be romantic. It could just be like relatives that they care about. Like the movies that make you care are the ones that focus on love and friendship and family and relationships. Like those things are very important. So I tried to make sure when I came up with these that I left room for relationships, for people caring about each other, for love. I want to see these characters out of their costumes. I want them to have lives when they're not flying around saving the world. And the MCU has basically just stopped doing that entirely, right? The DCU had some moments where they tried to do that and they tried to care about it. That's why I think Shazam, the first Shazam, worked so well, is because you cared about this kid when he was not Shazam. You cared about his little family. We need more of that. We need to care about these people outside of their costumes. We need Batman Begins, where, he has this relationship that he wants to have and he can't do it because, his mask is real life and he's only Batman now. And like, I want to have that dichotomy. I want to have Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, where like I want to see Clark at the Daily Planet with Jimmy and Lois and Perry and them trying to figure out, who Superman is. I want that secret identity stuff that basically doesn't exist in these movies anymore. And I feel like we've been so focused on just punching and fighting and all this big epic superhero crap that we forgot that the reason that we care about these characters is them as people, and their relationships tether us to those characters. And if you take away those relationships, we don't care about the characters. I mean, look at Batman, Ben Affleck's Batman. We never got to see any side characters other than Alfred. So as far as we know, Bruce Wayne does nothing with his entire life other than hang out with Alfred. Like, I want to see these people as characters interacting with other people in their worlds. And like, we need side characters, guys. We need non-superheroes to make the superheroes feel super. We need normal people to make the superheroes super. Okay. Big things to focus on with these is I wanted each superhero to basically, I wanted it to feel like multiple franchises, as I said before. So the Superman trilogy or whatever you do, Batman, whatever, however many movies he gets, Wonder Woman, however many, those are separate franchises. I wanted to look at them as those, that is their core, right? And that if we do the Justice League and we bring them together, it's bringing together disparate franchises and pulling them together. So it's an event, it's a crossover, it's exciting. So what that means in practice is the individual movie is more important than the connected universe. That sounds counterintuitive and it sounds dangerous, but I want you to care more about the individual film than how it connects to the rest of the universe. Because when each movie is just set up for other movies, then I don't care about the movie I'm watching and I will tune out. And then it just becomes filler episodes of a TV show. I don't want that. I want each movie to stand alone and be exciting on its own. I want you to want to watch just that movie. Like, I want you to watch like the second Batman film in my trilogy and just be like, wow, that was a great movie. I want to just watch that one. Like, even if I've never seen the rest of them, I just want to watch the Batman trilogy. Like, I want like Nolan's Batman trilogy where it stands alone. It doesn't need to be connected, but it also does connect. Like, we can also have these other connections in other films, but I still want them to feel complete on their own. And that might mean that there's a little less cohesion than I would like. Like, the MCU, all the movies look the same. I don't want to do that. I want each of these films, each, cinematographer to be able to come up with their own style that fits the franchise that they're making. And then we just have to figure out how to fix that on our end when we get to like Justice League. Like, it might not be quite as cohesive because of that. You might film Batman darker and grittier, and then when he shows up in Justice League, he's lit brighter and it feels slightly off. But I'll take that over everything looks the same and it's very boring, because then I know I don't really care. All I care about then is the crossovers. And there's less crossovers than there is everything else. So each movie is looked at, is given its due on its own, and is thought of that is more important than the crossovers. And that might seem crazy, but I think, in my opinion, I think that's the right move to make, because we've seen it go the other way. And that's why we get these filler movies that no one seems to care about. And as for like things connecting in continuity, if you have all these movies planned out 10 years in advance, you can make sure that things line up in the timeline and feel cohesive, while still granting enough leeway that each, franchise can exist on its own. I think that's pretty much it. So with this long intro discussing, the previous franchises that have come before and talking about some rules and setup, now let's get into the movies themselves.